Good evening and welcome to INQ&A. Medyo nahuli kami ng konti ngayon. The Inquirer question and answer program comes to you every Tuesday. Every week we feature a leading newsmaker to discuss issues of the day. And today we have a very special guest indeed. I am John Neri, editor-in-chief of Inquirer.net, and with me is my co-host, Christine Sabilio, Chief of Reporters. Tyne?
Good evening, John. Good evening to everyone watching us tonight. Today marks INQ&A's first month with Radyo Inquirer and Inquirer Television. Our guest for today is an iconic figure, someone who has been a key player in a previous era of Philippine history. Our interview this evening is very timely and relevant, especially with yesterday's opening of the formal peace talks between the Philippine government and the National Democratic Front. Before we start with the interview, we would like to share three things that you might not know about our guest. The first one is that I don't know if John, you know this already, but he previously released an album of poetry and songs titled Songs of Love and Struggle. And yes, he sang in that album, which were set to music by several artists. The second trivia is that he was President Duterte's professor at the Lyceum of the Philippines. And I think a lot of people knew this already, but can you guess what subject it was?
Political science.
Yeah, it's political science, but actually during my first interview with our guest, he said it was political thought. The last one is that, and this is a giveaway, his nom de guerre was Amado Guerrero when he wrote the book Philippine Society and Revolution, or Lipunan at Rebolusyong Pilipino, which has become a manifesto of the Philippine Revolutionary Movement. Our guest, ladies and gentlemen, is no other than Communist Party of the Philippines founder Joma Sison, who is now in Oslo, Norway for the formal peace talks.
Is he already online? Can we put him online?
Yeah, can we cue? The reason why we were actually delayed a bit was because of some technical difficulties. We were trying to get him on Skype. We were already talking with him. So, as you know, INQ&A we run from 8 to 9 p.m. Unfortunately, our guest could not join us for the full hour today because they are in the middle of the talks actually in Norway.
Yes, right now it's 8:18 p.m. in the Philippines. It's 2:18 p.m. in the afternoon in Oslo. The Royal Norwegian government is once again hosting the peace talks between the Philippine government and the National Democratic Front. And our guest left his place of exile in the Netherlands to join the rest of the NDF peace panel in Oslo. As Stein said, we were already in touch with him earlier, but the connection is not robust. So we're just trying to fix that. Some of you, in fact, many of you, we've had, I think we have more than 50 questions already.
Yeah.
I don't think we can ask all of these questions. We can ask only a few. So I think right now, the morning sessions of the second day of the peace talks have ended. If we're not mistaken, they've just finished their
The morning
lunch.
session, yeah, I think they're having a break.
Yes, so let's say they had lunch at 1 p.m. and so on. So this was supposed to be a very good time to have the interview with Jose Maria Sison.
Yeah, so we've been actually seeing a lot of videos and photos from Norway from the accounts of the government and the representatives of the NDF as well. And it seems that they're having a good time actually meeting members of the peace panels from both sides who are actually members of the peace panel from previous talks as well. So that's one of the things that we would talk about later when we talk to Kajoma about what he thinks is the prospect of the peace process now that it's finally ongoing again after being stalled for several years.
So what excites us about this particular INQ&A is that we are talking to this member of the peace panel who is taking some time away from the peace panel to talk to us. No? So right now they are in that hotel in talks sponsored by the Royal Norwegian government. Last December, Pine was able to interview Ka Joma in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
You want to
Yeah.
talk about that?
Actually, if you remember, we were in Paris to cover the climate change negotiations, and after that, we went to the Netherlands to have a quick interview with the CPP founder. And a lot of the things that I will ask today would be a follow up to the things that we discussed then. At the time, uh, the elections were still a couple of months off, and we asked him about what he thought about the different presidential candidates, and one of them was President Duterte, who eventually won.
Wait, I think do we have the connection already? Or
Okay, maybe we
Can-
can start the interview
can
finally.
we have our guest
Yeah.
online, please?
Oh, there, finally. Good evening, good afternoon.
Good
for
afternoon,
those in
Kajoma.
Norway.
Good evening po dyan.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Maraming salamat for taking time out from the peace negotiations. If we can go straight to the to our questions, I know you don't have all the time. Um, how was the first day and a half of the negotiations?
Well, if you don't mean the opening day, the open ceremony yesterday was very successful, and then we started what you might call the work meeting. We were able to finish 3 of the 5 items on the agenda that was set by the June 18 statement. So we are running very well. But of course, items 4 and 5 concerning amnesty and a mode of ceasefire will be more complex, I suppose. What we have just finished doing is make agreement on reaffirming the existing agreements between the government of the Republic of the Philippines, or GRP, and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines. And the second item that we were able to finish was the submission of the reconstituted list of
Jasig.
document holders
Mhm.
who are entitled to the protection of the joint agreement on safety and immunity guarantees. And a third item concerns the accelerated plan in the peace negotiations. And the panel-to-panel decision was to let the reciprocal working committees on social and economic reforms, and the working groups on political and constitutional reforms, and the working groups on end of hostilities and disposition of forces to hold a meeting this afternoon and submit later the technical details of the scheduled plan of work.
Kajoma, thank you. Yung sa agreement on the accelerated timetable sounds exciting. Nung hindi ako nagkakamali, nung the last time there were negotiations, I think about 5, 6 years ago, there was also an attempt to have an 18-month timetable and so on, but very quickly it ran aground. What makes this particular agreement now more solid?
Well, I've always said that President Duterte, in comparison to previous presidents, is more open, no, to really accelerating the peace negotiations. The previous ones were more interested in the capitulation and pacification of the revolutionary forces uh, under the guise of protracted ceasefire. That was the problem. Now there seems to be a greater determination on the part of the Manila government to make substantive agreements.
Kajoma, just going back to what you mentioned already. So you have already finalized the list of the JASIG protected consultants. Has the government panel accepted it? And now, because I remember that was one of the reasons why the peace talks were stalled in the past. They had problems with the list. So now we have a new list. It's final.
Yeah, indeed. Previously, the other side before, during the time of Aquino, um, uh, stood or took the position, rather, that the JASIG was inoperative and therefore it did not serve to protect the NDF personnel involved in the peace negotiations. But now there is now a reconstitution of the list of those who are entitled to the protection of JASIG. And this was what the NDFP was asking from the so-called GPH side, not from the side of the Manila government, but then the negotiators of Aquino um, would not budge, they simply said JASIG was inoperative. And so that was a big obstacle to the peace negotiations. But now JASIG is considered as valid and operative, and the NDFP has just submitted the reconstituted list. And so those involved in the peace negotiations on the side of the NDFP enjoy the protection of JASIG.
Kajoma, yung sa accelerated timetable, I know, in fact, you started off by saying while you have some agreements that marami pang kailangang pag-usapan, gusto ko lang salang maintindihan talaga, how long will this process take? Maybe
pinagkasunduan na the committees, reciprocal working committees, working to draft the comprehensive agreement on on social and economic reforms, or CASER, would try to finish their drafting job within the next 6 months. So there's a definite timeline. And then at the same time, the reciprocal working committees, the reciprocal working groups, rather, on political and constitutional reforms and on the end of hostilities would work at the same time. And one after the other, the reciprocal working committees shall be formed accordingly, and in order to finalize what would be ready-made draft agreements prepared by the reciprocal working groups. So more or less within 6 months, you have the drafts of
all three agreements.
The comprehensive agreement on social and economic reforms, as well as preliminary drafts on political and constitutional reforms, and comprehensive agreement on the end of hostilities.
if I can try to understand that in simpler fashion, Kajoma, when can we expect you back in the Philippines?
My going to the Philippines?
Yes. For a lot of people, that's a sign that the peace agreement is progressing
The
well.
work is in Oslo. the panels are supposed to meet in Oslo either on their own account or in supervision of the working bodies that are responsible for drafting the comprehensive agreement. So, paspas ang trabaho. So, I suppose I will be in Europe for the next 6 months to participate in the drafting work. So, there is no hurry. Um, and, I was supposed to go to the Philippines to attend the premiere showing of Tibak, no? The
Yes.
story of Kabatang Makabayan, and President Duterte and I supposed to attend, no?
Mhm.
The premiere showing in order to receive Gawad Supremo. But that has to be postponed. Instead, I have sent a video message, and I don't know if President Duterte will be able to attend. No, so there was a definite target for my going to the Philippines, but of course, I give priority to the peace negotiations in Oslo.
Kajoma, how are the peace panels now? We've been seeing a lot of videos. It seems that the two sides, even if they're coming from the different parties, they get along. And I believe a lot of them have been
The
involved in the
panels
peace
get
talks
along very
previously.
well. They're very cordial. They're laughing.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, well, uh, half of the time, I suppose, and they manage to agree on the serious matter between exchanges of jokes. No, and that's the atmosphere.
When,
So
yeah.
anyway, there is the spirit pervading to make the agreements according to the time schedule.
When is the next formal round of talks, and what can we expect after the 6 months when the agreements are finally drafted or the full agreements are presented?
I think the next meeting would be a meeting to drafts, to draft the comprehensive agreements, and I suppose after this meeting in Oslo, there is going to be another formal meeting uh, next month or early October.
Kajoma, if you don't mind, we'll talk about something not directly related to the peace talks, but may have an impact on them. I'm sure you've heard reports that the Philippine military, that some of the rank and file are feeling a little restive, especially with the release of the Tiamzon couple. How do you read?
Well, in any army, the first uh, rule is to obey all orders from the command. And so the commander in chief, the president of the Philippines, President Duterte, made the decision. The army, the military, has to follow. Uh, and there has been no objection. And legal processes have been followed, while at the same time, the joint agreement on safety and immunity guarantees has been invoked to justify the releases, because indeed the consultants of the NDRP who have been in prison for quite some time um, have been arrested and detained in violation of the JASIC. So it's very important the GRP side, the Manila government side, accepts the validity of the JASIG, and in accordance with JASIG, the releases have been made.
Ka Joma, we have a question from Facebook. We've been getting questions from social media. This is not really directly connected to the peace talks, but I think a lot of the people, the young people who are involved in the political discourse right now, especially online, they didn't live through martial law, for example. They weren't able uh, to see how the revolutionary movement prospered at the time. So this is a question from Jojo Castillo. He's asking, is the armed struggle still necessary?
Well, the armed struggle is necessary, has been necessary because of uh, what President Duterte himself has described as the corrupt character, the rottenness of the system, and he is not far from the left in saying that the oligarchs have oppressed and exploited the people, and of course he recognizes the that the oligarchs are servile to a foreign power like the U.S. And he himself says that he is the first left president.
Mm-hmm.
And that explains why he has a political will that goes along with the political will of the NDFP in uh, resuming the formal talks in the peace negotiations. It seems that he is determined. And so we can hope for better results and than previously, because the previous administrations were only interested in the capitulation and pacification of the revolutionary forces. President Duterte has expressly declared that he is for justice, and he is against the oppression and exploitation suffered by the people. So, along this line, the peace negotiations are being conducted, and so uh, the first comprehensive agreement uh, that will be worked out in the time of President Duterte's concerns social and economic reforms to be followed by political and constitutional reforms.
Kajoma, um, the revolutionary movement was born in a particular context, and that context was defined by the presidency of Marcos. Um, I know that you've
Well,
already.
the most brutal form of oppressive government was the fascist dictatorship of Marcos. And
Mhm.
instead of this fascist dictatorship succeeding in suppressing the revolutionary movement, it stimulated it. No, it laid the ground. Marcos. We used to call Marcos as the chief transport and supply officer, the chief recruiter of the New People's Army, because of his oppressive rule, extremely oppressive rule. The people rose up, and the New People's Army became strong.
That,
But even
mhm.
after Marcos, even when the pseudo democratic regimes from Cory Aquino to Noynoy Aquino came, really there was only a masquerade that went on, no? There was the facade of the democracy, but in fact, behind it, are um, are the worms of a rotting system. There is a continuous process of rotting and worsening of the crisis, and naturally, because the people continue to suffer exploitation and oppression, the New People's Army has managed to become strong and a force to be reckoned with. There would be no peace negotiations if, in the first place, the New People's government has become, has no value whatsoever. But
Yes,
the NPA thrives among the people as an instrument for justice against oppression and exploitation. So you have peace negotiations. In other words, the false democratic regimes that followed the outrightly brutal anti-democratic regime of Marcos were not really democratic. especially in very substantive terms. No, peasants continued to be exploited. The land problem
But
continued to be
it's
worse.
Kajoma.
Land was being taken away from them.
Mhm.
Excuse me.
No, but it's the same. Well, what you call a pseudo-democratic government that elected, or a system that elected the president that you are now conducting peace negotiations with.
But this is a president that you might call that beat the system too. No, he is a product of the system, but he beat the system with much less money than the other wealthier candidates.
Yeah,
He was able
effect.
to win
Mhm.
by properly adopting the campaign line.
If
He has,
mhm.
I'm not saying that he's a surefire perfect president. But among the candidates, he was the one who effectively attacked the rotten Aquino regime and the candidate Mar Rojas,
Speaking of.
and then he adopted the campaign methods
Mhm.
he that
Kajoma.
would characterize a mass movement, and of course he availed of the social media.
Kajoma, speaking of rotten regimes, you did classify the Marcos regime as the worst. And yet, it is okay with you for Marcos to be buried at the libingan ng mga bayani.
I said my bottom line is Marcos should be buried in Batak because the real remains are already buried there beside the mother as he wished.
Mhm.
What is going to be brought to libingan ng mga traidor at mga bayani, to be more precise about libingan ng mga bayani, no? Don't just say it's an exclusive cemetery for heroes. No, it includes a lot of non-heroes. Most likely, you're going to have the wax there with a big mausoleum to be built. No, to sort of make a monument. No, for the dictator.
Kajoma, you mentioned a while ago that President Duterte is not the perfect president. I remember when I interviewed you in the Netherlands, you said at the time, I think Duterte wasn't leading in the surveys yet. Well, the two of you had a long relationship. He was your student, and you said that you don't think he is the best president, but you like that he has strength of character, but at the same time, he has a loose mouth. And the past few months were a bit of a roller coaster for the two of you. You were trading barbs for a while because of the unilateral ceasefire issue. And so and the last statement I read from you is that you have reaffirmed your friendship. So how is it? How is your dynamic? How is your relationship with the president with those kinds of controversial issues?
There was a miscommunication. I call it a communication glitch. And so our friendship that grew out of our student-teacher relationship uh, has been able to prevail over the communications glitch because, well, uh, we are, I would say that President Duterte has been concerned anyway about the public welfare, what's good for the people, and that is the line that I also take. And so uh, we have come to continue pushing the peace process forward. So uh, I've pointed out in many instances that Duterte is a mixed bag, uh, uh, but he has shown in Davao City that for some 3 decades he was able to cooperate with the revolutionary movement as well as the legal progressive forces. And so he knows how to mix his policies. He tries to be inclusive and of course, as I said, he's not perfect. He is still born out of the system. And what we have is the promise to do fundamentally better than the previous presidents. Let us see. He's only 50 days in his office, and as far as the peace process is concerned, he beats the previous presidents, except probably Ramos, because Ramos, in his time, uh, allowed some 10 agreements to be made, including the framework agreement, the Hague Joint Declaration in 1992, and the Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. We still have to see whether during the time of Duterte we can have a comprehensive agreement on social and economic reforms. And we still have to see if we can go further than that and really establish the ground for a just and lasting peace.
Kajoma, if I can go back to our earlier conversation about Marcos and about the rotten system, the fraud, pseudo democracy that we're going through, that you say we are living in. My question really has to do with the apprehension of people who support the peace process fully, who still fear that it is precisely statements like this by you that will undermine support for both the peace process and for the Duterte administration. Statements like, I'll give two examples. One, that this is just a pseudo democracy, and two, that maybe we should rename the libingan ng mga traidor at ng mga bayani. That is not a popular idea, I can tell you. How do you respond to this? So, just to recap, the apprehensions of people who support the peace agreement, who are happy that the first day and a half of talks have gone so well, and then they hear statements like this, and then they wonder, is this just a continuation of the revolution by other means?
The revolutionary movement is open to the possibility of achieving bourgeois democratic reforms. And what do I mean by bourgeois democratic reforms? National independence and doing away with unequal treaties and arrangements. And having democracy by empowering the working people, economic development through national industrialization and land reform, expanded free education at all levels, a patriotic and progressive culture and international solidarity, trade and diplomatic relations with all countries. So, what is there that is not possible? Those are bourgeois democratic reforms. Duterte himself says he's a socialist, but in the Philippines, you cannot be socialist without first accomplishing the bourgeois democratic reforms. As I have already stated, what is the content of the bourgeois democratic reforms? Those are not impossible in a combination of what you might call left and middle forces. That is not impossible. And even when the left and middle combine, maybe the right can even be split and give them a chance to, some of them can have a chance to participate in the process of accomplishing what we have always called national democracy. It would be possible to even buy out the landlords at a fair expropriation price, and they are paid with industrial bonds. They participate in industrialization. So those are bourgeois democratic reforms adopted in other countries before, no? So now you have a president quite different from previous presidents. He says he's going to revolutionize the government. I haven't heard of any president saying that, no? And
Except Marcos. Marcos did proclaim
the president is Yes.
Except Marcos. Marcos did proclaim himself to be the center of to be the architect of a revolution from the center. He also. Mhm.
Marcos was a master of deception.
Mhm.
He said his revolution is democracy, and he is making revolution from the center and so on and so
Mhm.
forth. But Marcos was an acquisitive man, even as a congressman. We come from the same region.
Mhm.
You know, I know exactly how he built a mansion in Batak. No, he built his mansion by making money on Chinese immigration and on the foreign exchange control. No, that's Marcos. And and of course, when he became president, he accelerated the spending of war damage payments and got a big cut. No, so people are impressed with big, big public works projects, but Marcos um, made unprecedented cuts, no, from those projects. That's Marcos, and of course, when he said he would make the country great again, it would be at the price of suppressing the patriotic and progressive forces. That's
Mhm.
why there was immediately a clash between his ambitions and his attempt to put up a dictatorship on one side and the patriotic and progressive forces in the country, as well as the entire Filipino people.
That's right.
Kajoma, I'll go straight to the issue of drug killings. I think this issue has divided the Filipino people. Some are welcoming what has been happening with the drug campaign, with the anti-illegal drug campaign, while others are questioning the rising number of supposed extrajudicial killings. What is your stand on this?
Well, I go along with the progressive forces. They have a critical view of this, no? Because when the numbers are rising, and let us say you get a standard explanation that they are resisting arrest, but then families say that these people are being hit arbitrarily on the streets and in urban poor areas, while the big drug lords get better treatment and they don't get killed that way. Well, that is something that Mr. Duterte has to answer for, and he should answer you. I'm not his spokesman, no.
Yeah.
But of course, honestly speaking, you asked me my opinion. My opinion is, in the peace negotiations, we try to resolve um, radically different ideas and programs, no? And we try to seek common ground by invoking the interest of the Filipino people. So
Kajoma.
even in the peace process, you must recognize that it exists because of the armed conflict, no less. And the strongest kind of opposition to any government in the Philippines up to the time of Duterte is still the armed revolution. And this matter, the armed conflict, can be settled only if you address the roots and so on. So the revolutionary forces, with which I'm more associated more than anything else in the Philippines, um, would stand its ground anywhere in any arena of debate, and as well as in the arena of peace negotiations. Peace negotiations is not a process of yielding to those in power. Remember that. The armed revolutionary
Can you give us an
force.
example, Kajoma? So, for instance, in the sa usaping political and constitutional reforms, can you give us an example of an issue that will be taken up in that particular um, category that will be subject to negotiation sa political and constitutional?
Ano, there are two constitutions. There are two governments in the Philippines right now. You must recognize that there are two governments: the People's Democratic Government of Workers and Peasants, and the government of the big compradors and landlords. And despite the talk of President Duterte against oligarchs, so far he has not yet revolutionized really the existing state. So there is a lot of hard work ahead in trying to arrive at possibly something new. I think when it comes to political and constitutional reforms, uh, there will have to be an agreement. What's the working paper for? Is it the constitution of the big compradors and landlords, or the constitution of the big of the workers and peasants? Or there can be a third working paper, but that remains to be seen because we haven't really begun the negotiations.
How about this?
Mr. Duterte himself is interested in radically changing the constitution in favor of federalism and most likely parliamentary system.
That's right.
So things are in flux. We
For
should
instance,
not run ahead.
Kajoma, so for instance, he wants to do away with the party list innovation. What are your views on this particular provision, the party list?
As a concession to supposedly the marginalized, it's a bourgeois expression, to refer actually to the majority of oppressed people. When there are parties that stand for workers and peasants who don't have much say really within the system, so the party list is supposed to be an opening. But you look at the Congress now, there are so few of them, and I don't know how much better would be that Congress of big compradors and landlords, agents, political agents of the oligarchy would look if you remove the few party list progressives, and if you remove the party list progressives, you may not hear anymore any patriotic and progressive sound. At least you get some of that sound now, and we have to see what better system the Duterte government is trying to offer by doing away with the party list. But anyway, I've heard this argument. The party list system is now being taken over by the dynasties. That's also a valid criticism. As a matter of fact, there was concern on the part of the progressive party list groups that the dynasties might wipe them out. And it remains to be seen whether the progressives can maintain their existence over time.
Last question.
One of my last questions, actually my last question, Kajoma, would be, some of the people are asking us, what are your bottom lines in the negotiating table? What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that will make you leave the negotiating table? And related to that, maybe you could just answer. You already mentioned the party list group. Some of the former party list representatives are with the cabinet of President Duterte right now. What do you think would make them leave eventually? It's the same with the peace talks, parang parallel lang to that. What should make them leave the administration, if ever, in the future?
If, for instance, the Duterte government is only interested in a prolonged ceasefire so that it can forget all about the demand of the people for social, economic, and political reforms, then the revolutionary movement has to consider whether it's still useful to go on with the peace process. And as I have already told you, the reforms being demanded are really attainable if those negotiating on both sides have the interest of the people in mind. What is wrong about national independence and the doing away with with unequal treaties and agreements? What is wrong with um, giving more leeway to the workers and peasants to empower themselves? And what is wrong with economic development through national industrialization and land reform? If those things are clearly impossible in the peace negotiations, then there's no reason really for pursuing it. No, peace negotiations is not a process of surrendering, just having peace and peace of oppression and exploitation. That cannot be, because so long as oppression and exploitation continue, then there is always fertile ground for armed resistance by the people.
Joma, thank you very much for spending more time than we thought we would have with you. It's already 9:01 p.m. here in Manila. Must be 3:01 p.m. in the afternoon in Oslo. Maraming salamat po. We hope to have another conversation with you.
Salamat din po sa inyo, sa lahat ng kababayan at inyong mga tagapakinig, ating tagapakinig, sa binigyan ninyong pagkakataon sa akin na magpaliwanag.
Salamat po.
Okay, thank you very much. And we weren't able to air the commercials earlier because we didn't want to lose the connection. We're gonna go say goodbye now. I actually need to process a lot of the things that were said tonight. I have to go to my dictionary again and look up certain words. I think it's very interesting. And again, we thank Joma Sison for carving out some time from the hotel in Oslo, where he is actually part of the peace panel of the National Democratic Front.
So thank you everyone for watching on Facebook, on Radyo Inquirer and Inquirer TV. Follow us again on social media, on Twitter, to learn who our guests will be next week. Remember, INQ&A is every Tuesday, 8 p.m.
All right, so this has been INQ&A. Good night.